Hello, my name is Annie Paperno. Thank you for joining us. We are here to present the fourth session of our professional development series. This is going to go over virtual interview techniques as well as general interview preparation. So let's get started. This is a saying of mine. I think it's sort of funny, but success is 90% preparation and 10% perspiration. If you practice, prepare, and critique, you'll have a no sweat virtual interview. So preparation is the key. The more you prepare, the less you're going to be stressed, and the more you can really have a clear head when you have to answer all those tough interview questions. So before the interview, you really want to give yourself some time to prepare. You're going to want to analyze the job, analyze the company, practice answering interview questions, prepare questions for the interviewer, prep your technology and interview space, and dress the part. So what does it mean to analyze the job and the company that you're going to be interviewing with? You want to show that you have initiative and interest in the company. You want to focus on how your skills and experience match the job description. You don't want to come across as sounding too vague or just trying to get any job. This is the specific job that you want, and you have specific skills that are a great match. You're going to want to understand the company culture. You can do this by Googling the company, going on their social media accounts, Twitter, Facebook, check out their LinkedIn account, and any kind of news articles. You know, even if you can just drop a couple interesting facts about the company that you learned, that's really going to show that you took the time, that you're really invested in this company. You can also research the interviewer through LinkedIn or Google. If you know the person's name that you're interviewing with, it doesn't hurt to see what their exact position is, what their LinkedIn account looks like. You know, you'll be going in knowing a little bit more about the person that you're interviewing with. This is the most important part of the preparation. You really want to practice interview questions. This is the difficult part of the interview. You don't want to stumble on your words. You want to be prepared. So you can always Google what are some basic interview questions. Tell me about yourself. Why do you want to work for this company? Those are two pretty standard questions. What's your greatest strength? What's your greatest weakness? Where do you see yourself in 5 years? Again, Google standard interview questions. You don't know what they're going to ask, but even just having practice some basic questions is going to get you more comfortable. You're going to want to prepare questions to ask the interviewer. They're going to say at the end of the interview or even throughout the interview, do you have any questions? You don't want to come up blank. You definitely want to have a couple really solid questions that you actually care about the answer. You don't want to just ask any kind of question. So think about what you really care to know about this job that you're applying for. What tasks does a typical day or week consist of in this position? What skills are needed most in this position? Who will I be reporting to? What are the current priorities to focus on? What opportunities for growth will I have in this position? These are just a few. Obviously, there's all kinds of lists out there on the internet. Feel free to Google, but definitely prepare to have at least 2 or 3 questions. So let's talk about behavioral interview questions. These are a certain type of question that interviewers are going to ask to really find out about how you will work on a team, what are your client interfacing skills, how you can adapt to challenges, what are your time management skills, what are your communication skills, and maybe what motivates you and what are your values. And the reason these questions are so important is because past performance predicts future performance. So a lot of these questions are going to start out in a similar manner. To answer these questions, you want to use the STAR technique. You're going to start out with the situation. You're going to describe the situation, problem, or issue. The next step, T, is task. Describe the task responsibility you took to solve the problem. Next, you're going to discuss the steps you took to effect a solution. And finally, the result. What is the positive result of your actions? So let's see how this is going to work in behavioral interview question. So here's the situation. I had a group project where I was the team leader. I delegated one section to each team member and asked them to check in weekly until the project was due. The team members did not check in and many emails went ignored. The task, I realized I was sending too many emails and people were getting confused. So how did I change that? I decided to create a discussion board using the GroupMe app, which would keep everyone's conversation in one place, and the group could see what needed to be done. What is the result of this action? We were able to meet the deadline, and it was because of how I changed the communication style. So here are some behavioral interview questions that will really cue you into thinking, I think I need to use the STAR technique for this question. Explain to me a time when you had to deal with a difficult team member. How did you handle that? Describe a time when it was especially important to make a good impression on a client. How did you go about doing so? Tell me about the first job you ever had. What did you do to learn the ropes? Sometimes it's just not possible to get everything on your to-do list done. Tell me about a time your responsibilities got a little overwhelming. So you can see that all of these questions refer back to past behavior, past experiences. So to prepare for behavioral interview questions, I definitely recommend jotting down some experiences that you had in either a job, class experience, any kind of leadership experience, volunteer work, and think about maybe a challenge that you had to tackle, and talk and really break it down into the STAR technique: situation, task, action, and result. If you have a couple kind of go-to scenarios, that's really going to speak well of you. You're going to have a lot more confidence answering these pretty tricky questions. Let's talk about the 5 stages of the interview process. And these are going to be pretty similar with virtual interviews and in-person interviews. First stage is the icebreaker. This is just greetings, first impressions, and small talk. Second stage is qualifications and interests, your abilities, skills and work experience, your accomplishments and activities, your goals. Third stage is organization and position. They might ask you what you know about the job and what you know about the company. And if you had done the pre-interview preparation we talked about earlier, you're really going to be able to answer these questions with no sweat. Fourth stage is candidate questions. This is when you want to have those pre-prepared interview questions. And then closing, you want to, oh, excuse me, I forgot to go over a couple important points here under the candidate question. You want to have several questions ready, but you only want to ask one and allow for follow-up. I've heard some people practice interviews, they ask too many questions in one sentence. So they might say, can you tell me about the job? And also, is there anything else I need to know about? So you kind of want to avoid and also. You want to ask one question, make it short and simple, and then allow the interview to answer. This is when you're going to be able to have some back and forth conversation. You can also take the pressure off yourself a little bit in this moment. So ask a great question and then just sit back and listen. But have another question ready to go if the answer is a short answer. So stage 5 is closing and follow-up. Find out who makes the next move. It's perfectly acceptable to say, this has been such a wonderful interview. Can you tell me about the next steps? Perfectly fine to ask that. And it really shows that you're being professional and just wanting to know what the next steps are in the interview process. You're, of course, going to thank the interviewer for their time, and then you're going to want to send a thank you email within 24 hours. We definitely recommend an email. It used to be maybe writing a formal letter was something that was part of the interview process. Nowadays, it's perfectly acceptable to write a thank you email. So let's dig into how you prepare for an actual virtual interview that you're going to be doing probably through Zoom. So the first stage is you want to test your technology. You really want to make sure that everything is going smoothly. The last thing you want is a technical problem while you're trying to interview. You want to be able to focus on all those tricky questions using the STAR technique. So you want to use a device such as a laptop or a desktop. I would avoid using a phone. If you have to use your phone, it needs to be very stable. It should not be held in your hand. It needs to be resting on a desk or a desktop. Next, you need a stable internet connection. You don't want to have any kind of audio delays or lags. That's going to make the conversation really awkward. You're going to want to check the webcam and the audio. You're going to want to download any necessary apps that you need to connect with the interviewer. This is really important. You're going to want to check all of the login, the appointment time, the time zone, the names, and the positions of the participants. Especially with time zone, that can get tricky. We're in Central Time Zone. If you're interviewing with somebody on the East Coast, they're going to be on Eastern Time Zone. So just make sure you get the time zone correct. You can even email them back and say, just to confirm, 1 p.m. Central, 2 p.m. Eastern. So next, we're going to want to have the hiring manager's phone number to call in case of technical issues. And finally, have a printout of your resume and the job description right in front of you. So this is a great cheat sheet as well, if you need to kind of look at your resume, look at the job description to help you answer some of the questions. Okay, how do you set the stage for a successful virtual interview? You're going to want a very quiet room. I recommend not having it in your bedroom. A bedroom's a little too intimate for a business interview. If you have a shared space and the bedroom is really your only option, you just want to sort of rearrange where what they're seeing on their screen. So set up a little table, have it face a wall that has some pictures on it. Just make sure they're not seeing, clothes, bedding. You don't want sort of a distracting background. You want to have no pets, roommates, or alarms, no extra kind of noises that could startle you, that could disrupt your thought process. So if you do have a pet, if you can put them in another room, make sure your roommates know you're interviewing, and make sure you're not running any kind of dishwasher or laundry that's going to make a big noisy buzz during the interview. You want to silence your phone. We also recommend taking off your smartwatch. If you have a smartwatch, even if your phone is on silent, it still alerts you to calls or text messages, and that could really distract you. You don't want anything to kind of get you off your game. Again, your device should sit on a table, not on your lap. You want to adjust the height of a laptop so you're at eye level, not too high or not too low. You pretty much want to be just how I am in the screen right now, just centered with your right in the middle of the screen, but not too far away. This feels a little too far away. And then this feels a little too close. So just right about here. You also want to make sure a lot of the times that if you have a ceiling fan, turn the ceiling fan off and maybe try to not position yourself underneath the ceiling fan. I've seen a lot of interviews where there's a big spinning fan above the person's head and it's distracting. Next, you're going to want to arrange the background with a small amount of plants, art, or books. And then finally, choose your lighting. Natural lighting is really great. Try to avoid any backlighting. You don't want to be in the shadows. Okay, action during the interview. You want to maintain eye contact. If you look at the webcam on your device, that's really going to be a good way to maintain eye contact. It feels a little unnatural, but it's the best way to maintain eye contact. You're going to want to speak slowly, enunciate, and modulate your voice. So try not to sound like a robot, just saying everything like this. You want to have some ups and downs, highs and lows to your voice. Let the interviewer speak first and pause before responding to allow for the audio delay. This is a natural part of Zoom. There just happens to be usually a slight lag on the audio. So you want to speak really slowly, allow for the other person to lead the interview. That's their job. Their job is to lead the interview. Your job is to respond. So if you kind of take the pressure off yourself, say, I just have to sit back and respond to whatever they're asking. That can really take some of the pressure off and allow for you to deal with those audio delays. You want to keep good posture and avoid moving too much or doing any kind of distracting habit with maybe twirling your hair or using your hands a lot. I use my hands a lot when I talk, so I kind of have to make sure I'm keeping them in my lap because my nature is to use my hands. It doesn't come across well on video. Again, interviewing is a two-way process, so listen carefully and then react and answer. This is tough because you maybe have prepared so much, you already have the answers in your head, but you really want to make sure you're taking the time. And it's perfectly fine to say, wow, that's a really good question. Let me think about that for a moment. It's perfectly fine to do that maybe once or twice. You don't want to do that for every question. You want to avoid yes or no answers. You want to use specific examples, just like in your resume, just like in your cover letters. You don't want to be too generic. You want to point to specific experiences that you've had either in work, volunteer opportunities, any leadership roles. So really have some go-to stories or scenarios that you can point to. You don't want to ramble. You don't want to keep saying, and also to keep the conversation kind of going too far. You want to be able to answer the question, wrap it up, put it back into the interviewer's lap to let them lead the interview. And you always want to stay positive. Perhaps they're going to ask you some tricky questions about how did you manage any kind of conflict. So if you get any kind of question that maybe could come across as negative, find a way to say what the challenge was and how you dealt with the challenge. That's really what the interviewer is trying to find out. They don't want to hear about your bad manager or the hours were too long at your last job. They want to hear, how did you deal with long hours? What's your time management skills like? How do you deal with difficult customers? So you have to sort of spin the negatives into a positive. All right, let's talk about dressing the part for an interview. And there's two sort of different things going on here. If you're having a virtual interview versus an in-person interview. For a virtual interview, you sort of want to avoid any loud print. They can come across a little bit busy on the screen. So just whatever you're going to wear, put it on and then get in front of a Zoom screen and see what it looks like. If it looks sort of clashing and busy, you might want to pick something a little more neutral and solid. If you're going in person, I wouldn't necessarily say that that's a rule, but going more simple, neutral, solids is always a safe way to go. You do want to do some research of the company culture. There's business formal, there's business casual. You don't want to dress up too much and you don't want to dress down too much. If you're interviewing for a business job, they probably expect you to wear a suit. If you're interviewing for something that's not quite not like a finance job, I would still err on the side of business casual. I would never go true casual. So here, these illustrations say, wear a neutral button-down jacket, dress it up with a sweater or sport coat. For the women, a tailored neutral colored blouse and a blazer or a sweater to spice things up. Another trick for virtual interviews, you want to wear an outfit from head to toe. You really want to get prepared as if you were in an in-person interview. Put on the full outfit, put on the shoes, put on the jewelry, put on the bow tie. You really want to make sure that you're as professional as possible. And also this will make you more confident. If you feel professional and confident, it's really going to come across in the interview. All right, let's just run through a quick list of do's before you get ready for your interview. So you want to mentally prepare before the interview. You want to get a good night's sleep, maybe take a quick walk before you have your virtual interview, get some of the nerves out. Practice, practice, practice. There's a great program through the Career Center. It's called Big Interview. It's an automated AI, artificial intelligence interviewer who will ask you questions, and it actually grades you on your performance. So you can do this whenever you have time. You could just go to the Career Center on their website. It's under, I can't remember what tab it's under, but it's on the Career Center website. Another thing you can do is actually connect with one of the advisors at the Career Center, and you will do the big interview session on your own, and then they will help you critique it and walk through maybe where you can make improvements. Definitely recommend that. You want to prepare, but you don't want to read from a script. You want to have an elevator pitch, a 1 to 2 minute summary of your education and your experiences and your goals. You want to always have your phone on and nearby so you don't play phone tag. This is after the interview. So there should be, hopefully, if you did well on the interview, you're going to be getting a lot of phone calls. If you don't want to have the interviewer have to work too hard to get a hold of you. If they do miss your call, make sure that you have a good voicemail, a professional voicemail with just your name, first and last name, and the number to reach you at. You're going to want to write an email thank you, probably about 24 hours after the interview. No need to send a handwritten letter. Maybe if you get hired, that would probably be more appropriate to send a handwritten letter. But after a first interview, just a nice thank you email saying that you appreciate the time that the interviewer took. And if you are responding to emails, make sure you have a signature on your email. That's going to make you look even more professional. And you want to respond promptly with proper salutations. So that means starting off every email with "Dear so-and-so," and then sincerely your name. You don't want to just kind of go rush in and say, "Got it, thanks so much," or, you know, something sort of with abbreviations, no abbreviations. You want to prepare your emails just with a professionalism in mind. So in an interview situation, you don't want to be too casual. You don't want to come across as a best friend. You're professional. Even if you know the person, let's say that you've been working with them and you being brought in for a different position, just maintain that professionalism. It's not the time to really get too chatty. You know, certainly make some small talk, but you want to be professional, not too casual. You don't want to talk about personal issues. If you had some issue getting onto Zoom, getting there on time, don't ramble on about the issues. All you need to say is, "I'm so sorry, I had some technical problems. I'm ready for the interview right now." You don't want to talk about salary or time off unless you're asked. This is something maybe that is going to come up in a second or third interview. And then last, this is very important, have social media. You don't want to have social media accounts that you would not want your grandma to see. So in other words, make sure your social media accounts are cleaned up, turn them to private, try Googling yourself, see what comes up, and make sure that that's not going to be a situation for an awkward situation for your interviewer. So am I ready for this interview? False. The question is the interview ready for me? If you go through all these steps, the pre-interview preparation, practicing the questions, the behavioral questions, using the STAR technique, and then prepping your space for the virtual part of the interview, you're really going to do as well as you possibly can in your interview. So thank you for joining us. This is the end of our professional development series, and we really appreciate you joining in. Thank you.